In the early 1980s, Roger Wheeler spent millions buying a business that he hoped would be the basis for his sports empire. What he didn't know is that this purchase meant that he had entered into a fatal entanglement with the Boston mob and Whitey Bulger, one of the most feared gangsters in American history. Wheeler was a self-made multimillionaire who came from humble beginnings, who had established himself as a well-known figure in Tulsa, Oklahoma. By 1981, the 55-year-old father of five had built a business empire, notably as the chairman of Telex, a communications company that employed thousands in the Tulsa area. Wheeler had a reputation as a shrewd, confident businessman who thrived on competition and always seemed to come out on top. Beyond Telex, he had diversified his ventures, and a few years earlier, he made a fateful decision. He purchased World Jai Alai, a Florida-based gaming and sports entertainment company. At first glance, World Jai Alai might have seemed like an exciting new opportunity. Jai Alai is a fast-paced sport that was popular in parts of Florida and New England, drawing crowds who enjoyed betting on the games. As the new owner and president, Wheeler aimed to legitimize and grow the business and attract mainstream audiences to the game. However, what he didn't know was that the organization he purchased was harboring an extremely dark secret. Behind the scenes, an organized crime group from Boston, the Winter Hill Gang, led by the notorious James Whitey Bulger, had infiltrated the company. They were running a lucrative skimming scheme, siphoning off cash from the operation's proceeds, particularly from parking lot revenues and concessions. The scheme was made possible by an inside man, H. Paul Rico, a former FBI agent who had retired and taken a job as head of security for the organization. As a former FBI man, Roger Wheeler initially trusted Rico implicitly in what would turn out to be a grave mistake right from the start. Rico had once cultivated Bulger and other mobsters as informants in Boston, and now he was helping them line their pockets by stealing from Wheeler's new venture. Roger Wheeler wasn't someone to let money slip away unnoticed, and within a couple of years of buying World Jai Alai, he grew suspicious. He noticed irregularities in the financial records, profits that didn't add up, and cash that vanished before it could be reported. Wheeler voiced concerns that something wasn't right at the company, and he even confided to family that he was considering selling the business, sensing deeper problems. In early 1981, he fired several key employees at the company's Connecticut and Florida operations, including financial officers, suspecting them of involvement in an embezzlement ring. He sent his own son on a discreet trip to Florida to inspect the books and the computer systems for evidence of theft. Wheeler's relentless probing into the company's affairs signaled to Rico that the scheme was in jeopardy. The Winter Hill Gang ended up catching wind of this and decided to eliminate the problem at its source. On May 27, 1981, a sunny Wednesday afternoon in Tulsa, Roger stuck to his routine. Each week, he enjoyed a round of golf at the exclusive Southern Hills Country Club, where he was a prominent member. That day, Wheeler played golf with friends, had his usual drink at the clubhouse, and then headed to the parking lot to leave. He walked to his Cadillac, likely tired from the game, but relaxed in the familiar comfort of his club. As he sat in the driver's seat, something unexpected and horrifying happened. A man approached the car and, without any warning or chance for Wheeler to react, raised a weapon and fired a single blast at point-blank range through the window. The bullet struck Roger Wheeler between the eyes. Club patrons nearby heard a loud crack echo across the lot, but no one immediately investigated what was going on. By the time anyone realized what happened, the shooter had calmly walked away. Within minutes, club staff and friends rushed to Wheeler's Cadillac. They found him slumped in the front seat, unresponsive. Paramedics and police were called, but there was little anyone could do. Roger Wheeler died at the scene, the victim of a professional job. Tulsa police launched an investigation immediately, but they faced a perplexing mystery. Who would want Roger Wheeler dead, and why? Initially, detectives looked for local enemies or business disputes that might have led to this brutal act. Wheeler was powerful and straightforward. Perhaps someone held a grudge from a business deal gone bad. Yet, from the start, signs pointed away from the typical motives. This was a meticulous, calculated slaying by an unknown assailant who appeared to vanish without a trace. One of the Tulsa detectives assigned to the case quickly sensed this wasn't a simple local crime. The method, a single shot between the eyes, and the lack of obvious personal motive, suggested a pro had been retained. There were composite sketches made from witness descriptions of two middle-aged men, one believed to be the shooter, the other the driver. But these yielded no immediate matches. The two men wore the same glasses, the same style of beards, and had their hair done in a similar way, suggesting that they may have been members of an organized crime syndicate. Detectives learned from Wheeler's family and colleagues that he had been worried about the Florida operation of his Jai Alai business. When they dug into this angle, they uncovered evidence of skimming at the company's Connecticut venue. The fraudsters had skimmed money from parking and concessions in a way that pointed to a sophisticated organized fraud. In the early 1980s, the notion that the Boston mob could reach into the heart of Oklahoma seemed far-fetched to some. Despite these suspicions, the case went cold, and a cloud of fear and silence hung over anyone with knowledge. Potential informants were terrified, and for good reason. In the months following Wheeler's death, other gangland executions hinted at a wider issue in the Jai Alai world. One was Brian Halloran, a low-level Boston criminal who reportedly approached the FBI claiming he had information on Wheeler's slaying and that a man named John Callahan was involved. Halloran was executed on a South Boston waterfront in May 1982, alongside an innocent friend who just happened to give him a ride that night. The other was John Callahan himself, the former president of World Jai Alai who had sold the business to Roger Wheeler. In August 1982, Callahan's body was found stuffed in the trunk of his Cadillac in a Miami airport parking garage. It appeared that anyone who knew too much about the skimming operation was being systematically eliminated, but unsurprisingly, no one seemed willing to talk about it anymore. As the 1980s progressed, the Roger Wheeler case remained unsolved, frustrating his family and the Tulsa police. Eventually, Tulsa detectives began to suspect that the very people who should have been their allies were hindering the investigation. The FBI had jurisdiction over interstate crime and organized crime, and given the emerging Boston mob connection, one would expect federal agents to be deeply involved in helping Tulsa police. However, they were largely kept in the dark about the investigation. Unbeknownst to Tulsa detectives at the time, this reluctance had a sinister explanation. Agents in the FBI's Boston office were themselves compromised. It later emerged that certain Boston FBI agents had extraordinarily close relationships with Whitey Bulger. Bulger, incredibly, had been acting as an FBI informant since the 1970s, feeding agents information on rival gangs while he was effectively given license to commit crimes. Throughout the investigation, one name kept surfacing: H. Paul Rico, the former FBI agent turned World Jai Alai security chief. By 1982, Tulsa detectives suspected that Rico might have played a role in Wheeler's demise, and that the FBI may be compromised. That said, at the time, more level-headed investigators in Tulsa dismissed this as a virtual impossibility. As time went on, though, those suspicions were bolstered as the truth about the Winter Hill Gang's infiltration of the FBI trickled out in the late 1990s. John Connolly, a Boston FBI agent who was a handler for Bulger, was arrested and later convicted of multiple charges related to his corruption and protection of Bulger. Investigations by the Justice Department exposed that Bulger had been shielded for years. This shift finally gave the Roger Wheeler case new momentum after almost 2 decades. What had once been dismissed as a crazy theory that Boston mobsters ordered a hit done in Tulsa and that FBI insiders might have been complicit was proving to be reality. And with Bulger on the run since 1995 to avoid an indictment, some of his former cronies began to talk, hoping to avoid life or the chair. The breakthrough in the Wheeler case came as the new millennium dawned. In the late 1990s and 2000, federal prosecutors and investigators managed to flip some key Winter Hill gang members. One of them was Johnny Martirano, a feared enforcer who had been part of Bulger's inner circle. Martirano had been implicated in a string of gangland slayings. Facing the possibility of the chair or life behind bars, he agreed to cooperate. In a plea deal, Martirano admitted to carrying out over 20 slayings at the behest of the crew, and one of those was Roger Wheeler's. He revealed the chain of events behind it all. Whitey Bulger and his closest allies were alarmed that Wheeler's investigation was getting too close to their skimming operation, and decided that Wheeler had to be eliminated. Martirano flew to Oklahoma under an alias, and it was Rico who helped by providing inside information of the details of Wheeler's habits and schedule. On that fateful day at Southern Hills, Martirano lay in wait and executed the plan. He then slipped away, returned the rental car, and flew out, leaving Tulsa authorities baffled. In March 2001, nearly 20 years after the slaying, a Tulsa grand jury finally indicted all those responsible for the slaying of Roger Wheeler. By that time, 2 other men, allegedly central to the crime, were already dead. By way of refresher, Brian Halloran, the low-level Boston career criminal, had been snuffed out in 1982 on that South Boston shoreline, while John Callahan, the former World Jai Alai president, was stuffed into a trunk in Miami. Bulger, the mastermind of the operation, was still a fugitive when the indictments came down, and he had slipped away in 1995 after a tip-off about pending charges. Another stunning development was the indictment of former agent Paul Rico in 2003. At age 78, Rico was arrested and charged with aiding in the slaying of Roger Wheeler. Rico maintained his innocence, and he would never face trial. He died of natural causes in 2004 while in custody awaiting proceedings. Notably, Martirano, with 20 bodies to his name, including Roger Wheeler's, was given only a 15-year sentence as part of his plea bargain. In June 2011, 30 years after Roger Wheeler was slain in that Tulsa parking lot, news broke that Whitey Bulger had been captured. He was arrested in Santa Monica, California, where he had been living in hiding with his longtime girlfriend. Bulger's arrest made headlines worldwide after years of being one of the most high-profile wanted people in the country. Federal authorities decided to try all his cases together, as is usual in such complex interjurisdictional matters. In 2013, Whitey Bulger went on trial for the slaying of Roger Wheeler, amongst numerous others. The jury found he had participated in Wheeler's slaying, and he was sentenced to 2 life terms plus 5 years, ensuring the 83-year-old mobster would die in prison. Bulger would go on to meet a violent and horrific end behind bars in 2018 at the hands of his fellow inmates, his life of crime finally having caught up to him in his old age.